Okay, so many students struggle with this very critical algebra skill, and the skill that we're talking about here is solving for a particular variable in an equation where there's multiple variables. So this is definitely a situation that you're going to have to deal with when you're dealing with formulas. So this is not just a math thing. If you're in a science class, for example, and you're working with a particular formula, you may need to solve for a variable in that formula. And the topic here is what we call solving literal equations or working with formulas. And the objective here is we have this equation, n is equal to L minus A over D plus 1. We want to solve this equation for L or rewrite this equation in terms of L. That's another way you can express this problem. But most of you out there will struggle with this problem. But many of you are going to figure this out. Matter of fact, if you know how to do this, go ahead and put your answer into the comment section. I'm going to show you the correct answer in just 1 second, and then I'm going to show you the multiple steps that you need to take in order to do a problem like this. And this is not all that easy. So if you don't know how to do this, no big deal. But if you stick with me for the remainder of this video, you'll walk away with some, upgraded skills when it comes to the area of working with formulas. But before we get started, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is John, and I have been teaching middle and high school math for decades. And it really is my true passion to try to make learning math as easy as possible. So if you need assistance in mathematics, check out my math help program at tcmathacademy.com. You can find a link to that in the description below. And if this video helps you out, don't forget to like and subscribe, as that definitely helps me out. Okay, so let's go take a look at the answer. And there's a couple different variations of the answer, but if you did this right, you should have gotten something that looks like this. L is equal to A plus D parentheses N minus 1, or something equivalent. You'll see a couple of different versions as we finish this problem up. So if you didn't get this quite exact answer, but you're pretty confident you did this right, it's possible you did this right, but maybe you didn't kind of clean up your last version of the answer. And if that doesn't make sense, it'll make sense as I go through this problem. But if indeed you got this answer, we must celebrate by giving you a nice little happy face and A++. Matter of fact, I'm going to give you like 150%, multiple stars. And if you were in my math class, I would just say, you know what, just take the rest of the year off. You're absolutely amazing. I don't know how you know all this stuff. You must be watching that guy on YouTube. So great job. Now, again, if you're struggling with this, you're like, I have no idea. Well, don't despair. I'm going to explain this right now. Okay, so here is the objective. Okay, we're trying to solve this equation, and this equation has multiple variables in it, right? It has N, L, A, D, and then of course we have this one. We're trying to rewrite this equation in terms of L, or solve this equation in terms of L. So what you need to kind of think about when you're doing this type of exercise in algebra is we need to say, okay, we have an equation with multiple different variables. You need to focus in on the variable you're trying to solve for. In this case, it's the L, right? So we're trying to isolate this L or rewrite this equation in terms of L. Now, before I even continue on, it goes without saying that you must already be good at solving multi-step equations. Let me kind of back up here before I continue to explain. So in other words, things that maybe look like this should be very easy for you to solve, okay? So you can't move on to formulas and literal equations unless you've mastered equations with numbers, okay? So don't try to take on a problem like this until you go back and make certain that you understand how to solve these type of equations. Now, if you're already kind of like wondering or concerned that you are having a tough time with linear equations or an algebra, let me give you a couple quick suggestions because as I get into this problem, you're going to see steps that for those of you that have not yet mastered equations or linear equations, you're going to be a little bit lost. So I'm going to leave a couple links in the description of this video to my pre-algebra and algebra 1 courses. Those are the best courses for this level of algebra. Also, I have a ton of additional videos on my YouTube channel that will explain this, but let's go ahead and continue on kind of just understanding what we need to do in this problem. Okay, so here is kind of the secret, thought process in order to do this problem. Okay, now it's not really a secret. It just sounds kind of cool when I say that. So what we have here is, again, this equation with multiple different variables. We want to rewrite this equation or solve it in terms of L. So we want to think of all the other variables. In other words, this A, this D, and this N just as numbers. We're going to treat them as numbers, and we're going to just focus in on L, what we're trying to solve for. We're going to kind of think of that as the only variable and just think of these as numbers. Okay, so conceptually speaking, like L minus A, maybe we can just think of A as the number 2. It could be any number. We're just kind of using easy numbers here. D, you could think of as maybe the number 9, and then N could be like 5. So this equation right here, okay, we have to kind of think about, all right, what would we have to do to solve this equation for L? Okay, so you can kind of practice the steps here. You're like, all right, well, I would have to do this, that, and other thing in order to rewrite this equation with L with just these numbers. Those steps or that process is the same process we have to take in order to rewrite this equation in terms of L. Okay, so I'm going to show you an easy kind of example of how to kind of think about this in just 1 second. But first, I want you to do something super easy, and that is to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification button. You have no idea of the positive impact this has on my YouTube channel. Matter of fact, I consider those of you that do subscribe kind of as my own, basically new students in my virtual math classroom. And my objective is to try to teach math as clear as possible, easy to understand language. So again, too many people struggle in math, not because they can't or they can't learn math. It's because math is often taught in an overly technical manner. Okay, so I'm really passionate about trying to explain this stuff easily. On my YouTube channel, you'll find 2,000 plus videos from basic math to advanced math, like calculus and everything in between. But anyways, subscribing does really help me. And now back to the problem. Okay, so we're going to take a look at an easy example here first so we can understand this kind of process or this concept of solving for one variable in a multivariable equation. Okay, so here we have F is equal to M times A. Now, for those of you that are familiar with physics, and if you're not familiar with physics, that is an awesome science course. I would highly recommend taking physics, and the language of physics is mathematics. So here is a formula from physics, and this happens to actually stand for force is equal to mass times acceleration. Okay, so force is equal to mass times acceleration. This is an actual physics formula. But let's suppose we want to rewrite this equation in terms of A. Or in other words, we want to solve this formula in terms of A. Okay, so if that's the case, what we're going to do is think of A as the only variable per se in this formula. Therefore, we're going to think of F and M as some numbers, okay? So what numbers? Well, we'll just make some numbers up, and here I have some nice kind of easy numbers to kind of illustrate this principle I'm talking about. So we'll kind of think of F for the time being as maybe like a 10, and then this M, we'll kind of think of this as 5. So let's focus our attention over here first. So if I was going to solve for A, I have this super easy equation, right? 10 is equal to 5 times A. How do you solve for 5? Easy, you simply divide both sides of the equation by 5, right? And that's how I would solve for A. So what we're doing here is whatever's in front of this A, we're dividing both sides of the equation. So the answer is going to be A, okay, is going to be equal to 10 over 5. But now with this kind of idea in mind, or this example of the steps we need to take, let's go over here and solve for A with the actual variables. Okay, so here's F and here's M. Again, we're treating these as numbers. So we're like, oh, okay, here I just simply have to divide an M by both sides of the equation. If you're kind of, again, using some numeric examples or keeping that in mind, this does take some practice, but you can see here A is going to be equal to F over M, or acceleration is equal to force divided by mass. Okay, so a super easy example, but if you can understand what I'm trying to communicate here, then this is basically what you need to keep in mind, or kind of get your brain prepped for, if you will, when you're looking at multiple variables in an equation. You really just kind of have to focus in on that one and treat those other variables as numbers. Okay, so now that we understand that, let's go ahead and actually start doing the work. Now here, I'm going to go ahead and start this process. Again, if you're not quite sure about any of the things that I'm doing, that's probably a pretty good indication that you need to strengthen your algebra equation solving skills. But notice here, I have the problem, okay? Now, the first thing I'm doing here is putting parentheses around this difference, L minus A. Oftentimes, okay, problems will not have parentheses around sums or differences, okay? But you need to get in the habit of putting parentheses around sums and differences. It's going to save you a lot of heartache making errors, all right? And I know what I speak of because hey, I've been doing this for decades and decades. I've made all the errors. I've seen all the errors. So anytime you see something like that, oftentimes the problem will not have the parentheses. If they put the parentheses around a sum or a difference, they're basically giving you like a head start or kind of a little bit of a hint, or they're being very generous. But that's a really important point. Matter of fact, in this video, if this is the only thing you learned or you take away from this, that will be a big win for you, okay? But anyways, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. It's like I'm going to put parentheses around this difference. And just, again, in algebra, just always do that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get going here. And what's the first thing we need to do? Well, I got this L right here. I'm going to have to start cleaning this up. I need to start doing something here. And I have this thing plus 1. So let's go ahead and combine this into one fraction. Let's add these fractions up. So 1 is the same thing as 1 over 1. Okay. Now, I can add these two fractions here, and the lowest common denominator is actually d. So what you can do here is you can change this fraction by multiplying it by d, so we have the same LCD, the top and bottom, by d. Okay, then of course here you can see we're going to have L minus a plus d as our numerator. Now if you're lost right here, again, that's just an indication that you're going to have to go back and review how to work with fractions and basic equations. Now, for those of you that do follow me or have watched several of my videos, especially on fractions, I talk frequently about this fraction hack called the bow tie method. It is one of the best things in algebra. You must know this. And I'm not going to link anything to this particular video, but if you go to my channel and look at any of my fraction videos, especially on adding and subtracting fractions, I talk about this bow tie method. So what we can do here is it's just basically a shortcut. I can start from here. This 1, I can multiply to this numerator, this denominator to this numerator. So 1 times L minus A is L minus A, plus this, I'm forming the numerator here. D times 1 is D. Okay, so now I have L minus A plus D. That is the numerator over D times 1 is the denominator. Okay, so there's a couple different ways you can get from here to here. Okay, so now I added those two fractions. Again, I'm thinking of A and D here, and N as numbers. I still got my eye on the prize, which is L. All right, so now what can we do? Well, one thing, of course, you need to have experience in algebra. If I have one fraction here and I have this N, let's kind of back up right here. Anytime you have one fraction equaling to something else, a good approach to solving that is using proportions. So for example, if I have 1/2, let's do it this way. Well, first of all, let me explain to you what a proportion is. A proportion is two equal fractions. So if I have 1/2, what's a fraction that's equal to 1/2? How about 5 over 10? Okay. Now, when you have two equal fractions, what you can do is use the cross product to solve. Okay. In other words, when you have a proportion, by definition, two equal fractions, the cross products are equal. So in other words, 1 times 10 is 10, 2 times 5 is 10. That will always hold true when you have two equal fractions. The cross product will always be true. So in algebra, you need to look for patterns. You need to look for opportunities here. So I'm like, okay, I got one fraction over here now, right? This is one big numerator. It's not a pretty, it's not cleaned up yet, but, it is one numerator. It's one fraction and one denominator, and I have n. But you're like, well, let's just turn this into a fraction, make it n over 1. So now I have one fraction equaling to another fraction, I'm thinking, oh, I could maybe just use the cross product to deal with this. And that's, kind of what comes to mind. Now, there's other ways you could handle this algebraically, but I think using proportions is a super nice way to do it. So here we go. We have one fraction equaling to another fraction. So we're just going to use a cross product. N times d, or nd, is equal to 1 times L minus a parentheses plus d, and there we go. Okay, so now we just use the cross product to get rid of these fractions, and we're continuing on. We're still looking to solve for L. Now, at this point in the problem, I'm going to do something that is not required, but for me, I like to do this. When I have the variable on the right-hand side of an equation, like 2 is equal to, or 10, I'm sorry, 10 is equal to 2x, I prefer to have my variable on the left. It's more common in algebra. So what you can do is just, if the left is equal to the right is equal to the left. So you can kind of flip-flop and reverse what's on everything that's on one side of the equation can put on the other side and vice versa. So what I'm going to do is I know I want to solve for L. In other words, I want my final answer to be L is equal to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all this on the other side, and I'll put the n minus d on the other side. Okay, so that's an optional step, but I like to do that because when I finish up, again, I'll have my L on the left-hand side of the equation. Okay, so we're getting pretty close, and now A and D and N and D, these are all numbers. So to solve for L should be pretty straightforward, okay, in terms of what to do. So L is by itself. All we need to do is move this D over and this A over to the other side. So how can we do that? Well, this is minus A. If I can add A here, and then right here I have a D. Well, if I add A on this side, of course, I have to add A on this side of the equation. Remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side in algebra. And then here I can subtract D from both sides. So we'll end up with a N minus D. Of course, we have to keep track of this, right? Oh, I'm sorry, ND, excuse me, minus D. Now, I'm putting the D next to this ND because this has a D, so I'm going to put the D next to it. Okay, anytime you have variables, kind of like one variable and it's there's another variable involved with another term, something like in this situation, you want to kind of get all these variables as close as possible. You'll see why here in a second, plus A. Okay, so I'm just shuffling things around. Now, why would I do such a thing here? Well, because now I can factor out this D as a greatest common factor, right? So I can factor out the D, and you would want to do this. Okay, this would be kind of the more correct path here. So let's just kind of stop, and I want to get back to what I told you in the original or the beginning of this problem. I stated that some of you might have gotten the correct answer. Maybe you got this right here. Okay, so in other words, if you got this would be one version of the answer. I would probably give you full credit for this answer. Okay, but that, anytime you can factor out the GCF, you should in algebra. So here I can factor out this D because if I multiply this D back in, this would be D times N or ND, and then D times 1 will be D. Okay, so you can do that. And basically we are done. So this answer right here is perfectly fine. Or you could take this term and put it back in the back and put your A up forward. Both of these are perfectly equally fine. This is the one I gave you, but again, any three versions of this would be correct. These two down here are the most correct. Okay, so this is not easy stuff. In terms of level of difficulty, I would say this problem here would maybe be like a 6 out of 10. Not overly difficult. There's certainly much more difficult literal equations and formulas you need to work with, but you absolutely must know how to do this to be successful in algebra. Okay, and again, a lot of students struggle with this, but hopefully you got something out of this video in terms of, all right, this makes much more sense, thinking about focusing on the variable you want to solve for and thinking of the other variables as numbers, and then just thinking about the process you would take if they were numbers, kind of like mastering that, and then, implementing that procedure on that formula, okay? All right, this is something that definitely takes practice. So again, if you need additional help with this algebra stuff, check out the suggestions that I offered up. But here's the deal, okay? You can get good at that. You can get as strong as possible in mathematics. It just really comes down to how hard you want to work, but it always starts with great instruction, and hopefully that's what I was able to do here. Okay, so with that being said, I definitely wish you all the best in your mathematics adventures. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.